All the invisible guests we have yet to invite. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, good. That's good.
My mother was a wise woman. Now, she was my mother, so she drove me crazy on absolutely innumerable times and events in my life. But throughout her life, she made observations and distilled some truths that I'm really glad she shared with me. And one of those truths was that she said life is like a pond. And what you create in life creates ripples in that pond. And she said some ripples are very easy to see, and they're immediate, and there they are. But she said some ripples do not reach the furthest shore until after you're gone. And they reach that furthest shore through your kids, through your grandkids, or through the things you do, the people you touch, and what you accomplish. And now I want to tell you about one of my brother's ripples. Back in the day, my brother was a handsome guy. He was 6 foot tall. He had dark brown hair, which was trimmed very neatly. And he had a full black beard that was cut close and groomed to perfection. He was strong, and the girls loved him. One day he went to the doctor's office. He walked into the waiting room, and he looked around. There was a mom and a little boy there, and another man walking back to the doctor. And he crossed the room and sat catty-corner to this mom and this little boy. He picked up a magazine and started reading. Well, he felt eyes on him. And he looked up, and this little boy was staring at him. And he smiled at the little boy and went back to his magazine. Well, then he heard the little boy, and he looked up. And the little boy was saying, "Mom, Mom, that's G.I. Joe." And the mother said, "No, it's not." And the little boy said, "Yes, it is, Mom. Yes, it's him." And the mom said, "Stop it, Jonathan. That's not G.I. Joe." Now, Jonathan completely ignored his mom as she rolled her eyes. And Jonathan could have walked 3 steps across the room and been right in front of my brother. But instead, he went on a reconnaissance mission. He crouched down on the floor, and he slithered across the entire waiting area. It was just this long rectangle. And as he was doing this, my brother is watching him out of the corner of his eye, and he's looking up furtively at aircraft, and he's looking around at all the seats, waiting for enemies to pop up. And he makes it all the way around the room, and he comes up and arrives a moment later at my brother's knees. He looks up and says, "Are you G.I. Joe?" And my brother said, "Yeah, I'm G.I. Joe. What's your name?" And he reaches out and shakes his hand and helps him to stand up. And the little boy's eyes were like saucers. And he says, "My name is Jonathan." And my brother says, "Well, Jonathan, it is a pleasure to meet you. How are you doing?" And Jonathan says, "Well, I'm fine. Well, I'm at the doctor's office, but really I'm fine." And my brother said, "Well, that is great. I'm glad to hear it." Now the nurse overheard this exchange because of my brother's booming voice. She didn't want to spoil the moment and call out his name, which was Paul, not Joe. So she got up from her desk and walked around to the front of the waiting area and waved to my brother until she caught his attention. And when he saw her, they both looked at each other with this knowing glance. And he turned to the boy and said, "Well, Jonathan, I have to go now because the nurse is calling me. It was really great to meet you." He shook his hand again and tousled his hair. And he said, "I want you to have a great day." And Jonathan said, "Yes, I will." Now, Jonathan went those 3 steps back to his mother. And as my brother stood up to pass them, he heard Jonathan saying, "I told you, Mom. I told you that was G.I. Joe." And his mom said, "You're right, Jonathan. You're right. It was him." My brother said that for the entire rest of that week, when he thought about Jonathan, it brought the biggest ear-to-ear grin to his face. And when we have talked about that story over the years, it always brought a brand new smile. One day we were talking about it, and we said, you know what? Jonathan is probably somewhere in his 40s right now. And I bet if he remembers the day he met G.I. Joe, to this day, he gets an ear-to-ear grin when he thinks about it. Now I think about my brother and his ripple. My brother is 11 years older than me, and he has already gone on to his next adventure. He absolutely left us way too soon. But when I think about my brother, I don't think about the last year he was ill. I think about the time he was G.I. Joe. I think about the many times he was Santa Claus. I think about the time he took us apple picking in upstate New York. And I think about the time he took us out for Japanese food, and they cooked at our table, which way back then, that was very unusual. And he took us there because it was more than exciting. It was thrilling, and he wanted us to experience it. I think about my mom and what she told me about ripples. My brother never had any kids, but all the ripples he left throughout his life were that it was okay to be joyful and have fun. It was okay to laugh and share that laughter with others. It was okay to be totally silly, and it didn't matter who was watching. And now I think about my brother's ripple, and I know it hasn't reached the furthest shore yet, because now you have experienced a ripple that he created many, many years ago. So I guess my dear old wise mom was right. Thank you.
Yeah.